My name is Olivia Abernathy. I'm 28 years old, and I'm currently watching my teaching career implode in spectacular fashion at Westmount Preparatory Academy, where tuition costs more than my annual salary, and parents treat teachers like service personnel they can fire on a whim. This is my story, how a first-year English teacher with color-coded lesson plans and an embarrassing amount of optimism became public enemy number one to the most influential family in town. All because I had the audacity to give their son the isibao, grade he actually earned. 4 months ago, I still believed that teaching literature to high school students would be my life's great adventure. Now I understand why the teacher I replaced left mid-semester with no forwarding address. Some days, I fantasize about doing the same, just walking out mid-lecture, perhaps during Carter Whitman's next impromptu classroom disruption, leaving nothing but the chalk outline of my former teaching self on the pristine floor of room 213. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who checks her car for slashed tires in the faculty parking lot or instinctively ducks when the classroom door opens too suddenly. I didn't expect to become an expert at removing coffee stains from silk blouses or to have the school counselor's extension memorized for my own mental health emergencies rather than for my students. But here we are. I remember the exact moment I became Carter Whitman's target. It wasn't when I caught him cheating on the Gatsby essay, though that was the match that lit the fuse. It was the look in his eyes when I handed back his paper marked with a red F. Not surprise or shame or even anger, but a cold, calculating assessment, as if he were taking my precise measurements for a coffin. My father sits on the school board, he said, voice soft enough that the other students couldn't hear, but clear enough that each syllable landed like a precision strike. He's also the largest donor in the school's history. You might want to reconsider this. I didn't reconsider. That was my first mistake. It happened on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks into our silent war. I'd just written "Symbolism in Heart of Darkness" on the whiteboard when I felt it. Hot liquid splashing against my back, soaking through my favorite cream-colored blouse and new pencil skirt. The sound of ceramic shattering on the floor punctuated the sudden horrified silence of the classroom. I didn't scream, though the coffee was hot enough to leave angry red patches on my skin. I didn't turn around immediately, giving myself 5 seconds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, to compose my face into something resembling professional calm rather than the raw, humiliated rage that threatened to overtake me. "Oh my God, Ms. Abernathy, I'm so sorry." Carter's voice dripped with mock concern, theatrical and pitched to carry. "I tripped. It was an accident." When I finally turned, coffee streaming down my back and pooling in my shoes, 22 pairs of teenage eyes stared back, most shocked, some pitying, a few gleefully recording with their phones, and Carter, hand over his mouth in exaggerated horror, blue eyes sparkling with satisfaction. "Class," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the burning sensation spreading across my shoulder blades. "Please open your books to page 94 and begin reading silently. Carter, please get the janitor." He sauntered to the door, turning back to deliver his parting shot. "You might want to change. That looks inappropriate now." His gaze deliberately dropped to my chest, where the wet fabric had become nearly transparent. I spent the rest of the period teaching with my back to the wall and my arms crossed, the borrowed PE department sweatshirt scratching against my raw skin, while fragments of ceramic coffee mugs still littered the floor because somehow Carter had forgotten to find the janitor. Later in Principal Hammond's office, Carter explained, through practiced tears, how he'd been hurrying to bring me coffee as a peace offering, hoping to make amends for our misunderstanding about his essay. "I was just trying to be nice," he insisted, "and I tripped over someone's backpack." When I pointed out that no backpacks had been in the aisle, that Carter's seat was nowhere near my desk, and that 3 students had seen him deliberately pour the coffee, Hammond nodded sympathetically before explaining that without definitive proof, we should give Carter the benefit of the doubt. "He's under a lot of pressure, Ms. Abernathy," Hammond said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The Whitmans have very high expectations. I left with a first-degree burn and a crystal-clear understanding of exactly where I stood in Westmount's hierarchy. The next attack came during Parents' Night, when I was at my most vulnerable, surrounded by the very people who held my job security in their manicured hands. I'd spent hours preparing, arranging student work samples, and creating an engaging presentation. about our curriculum. I wore my most professional outfit. Replacing the coffee-stained one had cost nearly half a paycheck, and practiced addressing potential concerns with just the right balance of authority and approachability. The evening began smoothly enough. Parents drifted between classrooms, collecting progress reports and reassurances that their exceptional children were, indeed, exceptional. I was mid-conversation with a mother concerned about her daughter's analysis skills when I saw them enter. Richard and Elaine Whitman, Carter strategically positioned between them like a prince with his royal guard. Richard Whitman was exactly what you'd expect: tall, silver-haired, Rolex-wearing, with the confident stride of a man accustomed to rooms falling silent at his arrival. Elaine was sleek and polished, her smile as practiced as her tennis serve was rumored to be, and Carter wearing an expression of wounded innocence that would have impressed Stanislavski himself. I continued my conversation, hyper-aware of the Whitmans examining my classroom display, whispering to each other, Carter pointing at various items with barely concealed disdain. When I finished with the concerned mother, I took a deep breath and approached them with my most professional smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitman, I'm so glad you— What exactly is this?" Richard Whitman interrupted, holding up a paper from my exemplary essay display. Even from 3 feet away, I could smell the expensive whiskey on his breath. "That's an A+ essay. On the colonial subtext in Conrad's— No, I mean this." He flipped to the comments section where I had written detailed feedback. "You praise this student for making insightful connections and having sophisticated analysis, yet you failed my son for essentially the same work." My stomach dropped. Carter must have shown them his plagiarized essay, likely with my comments, but without the plagiarism notation I'd made on the online submission portal. "Mr. Whitman, there were substantial differences in the quality and originality of the work? Are you calling my son a liar?" Elaine Whitman stepped forward, voice pitched to carry across the now quieting classroom. Other parents turned to watch, sensing drama. "Not at all," I said, desperately trying to maintain both my composure and a conversational volume. "I'd be happy to discuss Carter's work privately." "So you can intimidate him again?" Richard's voice boomed. "The boy comes home in tears because of how you've singled him out." Carter, on cue, looked down at his shoes, the very picture of a persecuted student. I caught the ghost of a smirk before he rearranged his features into dejection. "I want to see your grading rubric," Richard continued, "and I want explanation for why you've targeted my son. Is this because of our family's position? Some sort of reverse discrimination?" The room was completely silent now. Dozens of parents watched the spectacle unfolding, their faces showing emotions ranging from discomfort to vindictive interest. In that moment, I realized the entire event had been choreographed. The timing, the volume, the accusations calculated for maximum audience and impact. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion with Principal Hammond," I suggested, my voice sounding far away even to my own ears. "Excellent idea," Richard said. "I'm sure he'll be very interested to hear how you're driving students to tears and grading based on personal vendettas rather than merit." As they marched triumphantly from my classroom, Carter turned back, making brief but unmistakable eye contact. Unlike his parents, he didn't bother hiding his satisfaction. This wasn't just about a grade anymore. This was entertainment for him, a game where he controlled all the pieces. The remainder of Parents' Night was a blur of awkward conversations and pitying glances. The story spread through the school community before morning. Not the truth, but the Whitman version, where I was an unstable, vindictive teacher with a mysterious grudge against their innocent son. The digital attack began the following week. I didn't notice at first, blissfully unaware as I guided my sophomore class through the crucible, ironically discussing the destructive power of false accusations while a very real character assassination unfolded online. It was Georgia Evans, one of my quieter students, who finally told me after class, her eyes darting nervously to the door as if Carter might materialize at any moment. "Miss Abernathy," she whispered, "you should probably know about the Instagram account." The account was called Abernathy Failures and featured surreptitiously taken unflattering photos of me, mouth open mid-sentence, bending over to pick up you. A dropped marker, frowning in concentration, each overlaid with a quote I had supposedly said. Most were wildly inappropriate comments about students, crude remarks about literature, or confessions of incompetence. I literally have no idea what I'm teaching. I just make stuff up and hope no one notices. Shakespeare is boring. I only teach it because I have to. Some of you are too stupid to understand this book anyway. The account had over 400 followers, nearly the entire student body, and, horrifyingly, some parents and even a few faculty members. The comments ranged from laughing emojis to genuine outrage that someone so unprofessional was teaching at Westmount. Though the account was anonymous, the most damning quotes always seemed to come from incidents only someone in my AP literature class, Carter's class, would know about. I reported it to administration immediately. Principal Hammond sighed heavily, promised to look into it, and reminded me that these things are very difficult to prove. The account disappeared briefly, then reappeared under a slightly different name with more content, including photoshopped images of me in inappropriate situations. When I pressed Hammond about the investigation, he shrugged helplessly. We spoke. To several students, including Carter Whitman, since you specifically named him as a suspect, all denied any knowledge? He peered at me over his glasses. Olivia, are you sure this isn't making a mountain out of a molehill? Teens will be teens. The message was clear. Even with evidence, even with my reputation and mental health unraveling, nothing would be done. The Whitmans were untouchable, and by extension so was Carter. Winter arrived, bringing with it midterm exams and a cold snap that left the campus glittering with frost. I was administering the AP Literature exam, pacing silently between rows of bent heads and scratching pencils, when I felt it, warm, wet, and unmistakable, saliva hitting the back of my neck and sliding. Down beneath my collar, I stopped dead in my tracks. Behind me, I heard a muffled snicker quickly disguised as a cough. I didn't need to turn to know it was Carter, seated strategically in the back row despite my assigned seating chart, which Hammond had overruled after a call from Elaine Whitman, claiming her son couldn't see the board from his original seat. The violation was so intimate, so profoundly degrading, that for a moment I couldn't move. I felt the saliva cooling against my skin, my body frozen between fight and flight, while my mind screamed at the sheer indignity of it. What does one do when a student spits on you? It wasn't covered in my education courses or teacher training. There's no protocol for wiping someone else's bodily fluids from your person while maintaining the decorum expected of a Westmount Preparatory Academy faculty member. I walked stiffly to my desk, took a tissue from the drawer, and wiped my neck. With as much dignity as I could muster, several students watched wide-eyed, a few looking genuinely concerned. Carter kept his eyes innocently on his exam paper, the very picture of academic concentration. After class, I went straight to Hammond's office, tissue clutched in my hand like evidence. Was it evidence? Should I have bagged it like CSI? Spit on me, I said without preamble. Carter Whitman physically assaulted me during the exam. Hammond's expression cycled rapidly from shock to concern, to that now familiar calculation of political risk. Did anyone see this happen? He asked. He sat in the back row, but the students nearby must have heard it. But no one actually saw. Him do it? I felt it, Principal Hammond. I felt someone's saliva hit my neck. Carter was directly behind me. He steepled his fingers. Ms. Abernathy, spitting on someone is a serious accusation, one that could result in suspension or expulsion. The unspoken but hung in the air between us. But it was Carter Whitman. But his father chaired the board. But the new science wing bore the Whitman family name. I want it documented, I insisted. I want a formal record that this happened. Hammond promised to speak with Carter and make a note of the incident. Later that day, I was called back to his office where a tearful Carter claimed he'd been battling seasonal allergies and had accidentally sneezed. He was mortified that any moisture might have reached me and couldn't understand why I would think he'd done something so disgusting intentionally. The incident was documented as an unfortunate misunderstanding. That night, I sat in my bathtub for an hour, scrubbing my neck until the skin was raw, trying to wash away the memory of that warm, deliberate violation and the complete impotence I felt in its aftermath. By March, the daily microaggressions had taken their toll. Carter's campaign had escalated to include others. Papers mysteriously disappearing from my desk, chalk replaced with wax sticks that wouldn't write, my online gradebook glitching to show all A's for his assignments regardless of what I entered. Each incident was small enough to be explained away. Together, they formed a pattern of targeted harassment that was slowly draining my passion for teaching. I'd lost weight, developed insomnia, and jumped at sudden noises. Other teachers had begun avoiding me in the faculty lounge, fearful of being associated with the woman in the Whitman's crosshairs. Most students remained respectful in class, but there was a new undercurrent, a knowledge that actions against Miss Abernathy carried no consequences, that authority in room 213 was an illusion that could be shattered at any moment. The final incident, the one that would either end my career or save it, happened during our unit on Toni Morrison's Beloved. I'd assigned small groups to analyze different themes in the novel, with presentations due at the end of the week. Carter was grouped with Sarah Chen and Marcus Davis, two of my strongest students. When presentation day arrived, I could tell something was wrong the moment Carter's group approached the front of the class. Sarah looked nauseated, Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes, and Carter wore the smug expression I'd come to dread. "Our presentation," Carter began, clicking to the first slide, "is on the theme of sexuality in Beloved." The slide that appeared was not their assigned analysis. Instead, it was an image of a grotesquely photoshopped pornographic image with my face superimposed on it. The class erupted. Gasps, nervous laughter, phones immediately raised to capture the moment. Sarah burst into tears. Marcus lunged for the computer to stop the presentation, but Carter blocked him. "Carter, turn that off immediately," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant as I strode toward the front of the room. "What?" His eyes widened in feigned innocence. "This is what you assigned us. You said Morrison's work explores sexuality and—" "Enough!" I rarely raised my voice, and the sharpness of it silenced the room instantly. "Everyone close your laptops. And put your phones away, now." I yanked the HDMI cable from the projector, but the damage was done. The image had been seen, phones had recorded. It would be all over the school within minutes, probably reaching parents by dinner. "Miss Abernathy," Carter said loudly, "I don't understand why you're so upset. This was the assignment you gave us. We have the email to prove it." Sure enough, he pulled out a printed email that appeared to be from my account, explicitly instructing his group to create a provocative visual presentation exploring sexual themes. It was dated 2 weeks earlier and addressed to Carter, Sarah, and Marcus. In that moment, standing before a classroom of stunned teenagers, staring at an email I had never written and an obscene image of myself that would likely be circulating. Online before the bell rang, something inside me finally snapped. Not in the way Carter wanted. I didn't scream or cry or storm out, giving him the meltdown he'd been trying to provoke for months. Instead, a strange calm descended, the kind that comes when you've hit rock bottom and realize there's nowhere to go but up. "Sarah and Marcus, you're excused to the library. Everyone else, silent reading until the bell." My voice was steady. "Carter, you're coming with me to Principal Hammond's office. Bring that email and your laptop." Why should I? The momentary confusion on his face was almost worth the horror of the past few minutes. This wasn't following his script. "Because," I said, meeting his eyes directly for the first time in weeks, "I've documented every incident since September. Every accident, every misunderstanding, every time you've created fake emails or social media accounts. I have dates, screenshots, and witness statements. And as of last week, I have this." I held up my phone, displaying an audio recording app. "Westmount might be willing to overlook a lot for the Whitman family, but I'm betting even your father draws the line at distributing pornographic images of a teacher. That's not just a school violation, it's a crime." The blood drained from Pete Carter's face. For once, his composure slipped completely, revealing the petulant, frightened child beneath the calculated cruelty. You're recording me? That's illegal." "Massachusetts is a one-party consent state for audio recording," I said calmly. "I only needed my own permission. I learned that while documenting everything that's happened since you decided to target me. Now, Principal Hammond's office, or would you prefer I call the police directly?" As we walked silently through the hallways, I realized I was no longer afraid. Not of Carter, not of the Whitmans, not even of losing my job. Some things were worth fighting for, and my dignity, along with the safety of every other teacher who might find themselves in Carter's crosshairs, was one of them. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what happens when wealth and privilege are allowed to weaponize a child. When adults abdicate their responsibility to set boundaries, when an educational institution betrays its core values for donor dollars. Carter Whitman had spent months trying to break me. Instead, he'd only succeeded in showing me exactly how strong I really was. And as we approached Hammond's office, where I knew the road ahead would still be difficult and uncertain, I felt something I hadn't experienced. In months, hope. Not the naive optimism I'd arrived with in September, but something more resilient. A hard-earned conviction that even at Westmount Preparatory Academy, truth and justice might still stand a chance against money and power. At the very least, I was ready to find out. Turns out, threatening to expose the Crown Prince of Westmount Prep doesn't earn you a parade or even a thank you for your service mug. What it does earn you is a special kind of purgatory, the administrative kind, where emails go unanswered and closed-door meetings happen without you. For 3 days after the presentation incident, I was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. That's corporate speak for, we're trying to figure out if we can fire you without getting sued. I spent those days alternating between manic cleaning sprees in my tiny apartment. Nothing says processing trauma like alphabetizing your spice. Rack at 3 a.m. and staring vacantly at half-finished Netflix shows. My sister Maggie called daily, her voice oscillating between supportive outrage, "They put you on leave?" after what he did, and practical concern, "Have you called the union? Rep yet?" My parents, retired teachers themselves, offered to drive up from Rhode Island. I declined. Something about having your 60-something parents arrive to fight your battles felt like the final surrender of adult dignity. On the 4th day, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Ms. A, it's Sarah Chen. We have proof. Can we meet?" Sarah and Marcus had been working behind the scenes. While I was stress organizing my sock drawer, they had been gathering evidence. Screenshots of Carter's search history on the library computer where he'd created the fake email, witness statements from students who'd seen him tampering with. My classroom materials, even a damning video of Carter bragging about getting Abernathy fired at a party the previous weekend. "We were scared before," Marcus admitted when we met at a coffee shop far from the Westmount orbit. "Everyone knows you don't mess with the Whitmans." Sarah, typically reserved, had a new steel in her voice. "But what he did with that presentation? He tried to make us complicit. We never agreed to that." I stared at these teenagers, these children really, who had shown more courage and integrity than most of the adults in this situation, including, if I'm being honest, me. For months I'd been playing defense, documenting incidents, but still trying to navigate within a broken system, still hoping that professionalism and patience would eventually be rewarded. "Why?" I asked them. "Why risk it?" Marcus looked down at his untouched hot chocolate. "My mom works in the cafeteria. If they can do this to a teacher," Sarah finished his thought, "they can do it to anyone." Armed with their evidence and my own documentation, I contacted an employment attorney who specialized in educational settings. Catherine Okafor listened to my story without interruption, occasionally making notes or nodding. Unlike Principal Hammond, she maintained eye contact throughout. "This is textbook harassment," she said when I finished, "and the school's response, or lack thereof, constitutes a hostile work environment. The pornographic image alone could be grounds for both. Criminal charges and a civil suit. Against a minor?" I asked, surprising myself with the twinge of protective instinct I still felt toward Carter despite everything. Catherine gave me a look that managed to be both sympathetic and no-nonsense. "Ms. Abernathy, this isn't typical teenage misbehavior. This is a calculated campaign of harassment enabled by adults who should know better. Carter may be a minor, but his parents aren't. And neither is Principal Hammond, who failed in his duty to provide you with a safe workplace." I left her office with something I hadn't felt in months, a plan that didn't involve just surviving until summer break. The next morning, instead of reporting to Hammond's office as instructed, I arrived with Catherine Okafor. The look on Hammond's face when we walked in together, professional shock overlaying personal panic, was almost worth the retainer fee. Alone. "Principal Hammond," Catherine began, "I understand you've been investigating a serious incident involving Ms. Abernathy and student Carter Whitman. We're here to discuss the school's response to months of documented harassment and the creation and distribution of sexually explicit material featuring my client." Hammond's eyes darted between us. This is an internal matter. We have protocols." Yes, protocols that should have been followed months ago when Ms. Abernathy first reported problems. I have here. She placed a thick folder on his desk. A comprehensive timeline of incidents, administrative responses or lack thereof, and witness statements. I've flagged the potential violations of Massachusetts educational statutes and employment law for your convenience. I'd expected to feel nervous, but sitting there watching Catherine systematically dismantle the fortress of institutional protection around the Whitmans, I felt something else entirely, a kind of lightness, as if the weight I'd been carrying had been recognized and named. Hammond's face cycled through a remarkable series of expressions: indignation, calculation, resignation, and finally, a kind of grim acceptance. What exactly are you seeking here? Catherine outlined our terms. A formal investigation conducted by an independent third party, immediate safety measures including no contact between Carter and myself, and a review of the CHIUSA, school's harassment policies. The unspoken threat hung in the air. If these reasonable requests weren't met, our next stop would be the police station, followed by a call to the local newspaper that would love nothing more than a scandal involving Westmount's most prominent family. To Hammond's credit, once he realized the jig was up, he moved quickly. The school board, minus Richard Whitman, who recused himself, convened an emergency session. Carter was placed on suspension pending a disciplinary hearing. And the Whitmans? Well, the Whitmans did what wealthy people have done since the beginning of time when confronted with irrefutable evidence of wrongdoing. They disappeared to their vacation home in the Berkshires while their attorneys handled damage control. I returned to teaching the following week. The whispers followed me through the hallways, of course. Teenagers find out everything, especially the things adults try to hide. But these whispers were different, not mocking or scandalized, but something closer to respectful. I had done the impossible. I had stood up to the Whitmans and lived to tell the tale. In my classroom, subtle shifts occurred. Students who had previously been silent began participating more. A few quietly apologized for not speaking up sooner. Even my most disengaged seniors started turning in assignments on time. It was as if by defending my own boundaries, I had created a safer space for everyone. Not everything changed overnight. The independent investigation moved at a glacial pace. Hammond still avoided eye contact in faculty meetings. And occasionally I'd find myself flinching at sudden movements or checking my classroom door before entering, muscle memory from months of hypervigilance that would take time to unlearn. But other things changed profoundly. I started sleeping. Through the night again, I rejoined my weekend running group. I stopped checking social media obsessively for new attacks. And most importantly, I remembered why I had wanted to teach in the first place, not to police essays or assign grades, but to create a space where ideas and voices mattered, where power came from knowledge rather than family names. 2 months after the confrontation, I received an unexpected visitor after school. Elaine Whitman stood in my classroom doorway, looking simultaneously imperious and uncomfortable, like royalty forced to use a public restroom. "Ms. Abernathy," she nodded stiffly. "May I come in?" I gestured to the student desk nearest my own. She sat awkwardly, her designer handbag looking absurdly out of place on the scratched laminate surface. "Carter will not be returning to Westmount," she said without preamble. "We've enrolled him in a boarding school in Switzerland, a fresh start." I said nothing, waiting. Elaine Whitman was not a woman who made social calls without purpose. "I want you to know," she continued, examining her manicure rather than meeting my eyes, "that we don't condone what happened. Richard and I, we've always believed in excellence and accountability. Perhaps we lost sight of those values with Carter." It was as close to an apology as Whitman pride would allow. I could have pressed for more, demanded a real acknowledgement of the harm done, pointed out that shipping Carter to the Alps didn't address the underlying issues. But looking at this woman, with her perfectly highlighted hair and carefully curated existence, I felt an unexpected pang of something like pity. "Your son is very intelligent," I said finally, "and creative. I hope he finds better ways to use those gifts in the future." Her eyes snapped to mine, searching for sarcasm or veiled insult. Finding none, her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Yes. Well, the headmaster at Edelweiss Academy has a military background. I doubt Carter will find him as accommodating as Westmount has been. After she left, I sat at my desk for a long time, watching the afternoon light create golden rectangles on the classroom floor. I thought about Carter on a plane to Switzerland, about the Whitmans rewriting this story for their social circle. Such a wonderful opportunity for Carter's international experience. About cycles broken and cycles perpetuated. I thought about what I would have done differently if I could go back to September, set firmer boundaries immediately, documented everything from day one, trusted my instincts rather than institutional. Reassurances. I thought about the hidden curriculum we teach alongside literature and writing, what we normalize, what we challenge, what we silently endure. The truth is, I'm still figuring out what victory looks like in this situation. It's not as simple as teacher stands up to bully and everyone learns a valuable lesson. The Whitmans haven't really faced consequences, they've just relocated the problem. Hammond still runs the school with one eye on the donor list. The system that allowed this to happen remains largely intact, but something has shifted, both within me and within the smaller ecosystem of my classroom. There's a new clarity about what I will and won't accept, what's negotiable and what's sacred. My students seem to sense this boundary, this backbone that wasn't visible before. They test it occasionally, as teenagers should, but there's an underlying respect that wasn't there in the fall. Yesterday, during a particularly intense discussion of Macbeth and the nature of power, Marcus Davis raised his hand. Ms. Abernathy, he asked, do you think standing up to power always works out in real life? I mean, outside of books? The class fell silent, the subtext of his question hanging in the air between us. Not always, I answered honestly. Sometimes the cost is too high, sometimes the system protects itself, but I believe there's power in naming the truth, even when it doesn't change everything. I paused, looking at their young faces, so earnest, and complicated and full of potential. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you find allies who help shoulder the burden. Marcus nodded, satisfied with an answer that offered neither fairy tale nor cynicism. As the discussion resumed around us, I caught Sarah Chen's eye across the room. She gave me the smallest of smiles, co-conspirator, witness, ally in the ongoing work of creating a world where power isn't the only thing that matters. And for now, in room 213 at Westmount Preparatory Academy, that feels like enough.